credit for. If you have something that's going on in your life right now that's challenging.
All right, Chris here today in COMOR again with my main snowboard review maestro, Andreas.
Hey guys, what's going on?
And yeah, today I'm really excited personally because we're looking at one of the best looking snowboard series out there, in my opinion, the Spring Break series.
Yeah guys, these are your dream boards for powder riding.
These are a collaboration between Corey Smith and Capita, and it's basically taking a lot of garage designs from an art major and then using one of the best factories in the world, the mothership, putting those two things together, and then what pops out the other side is super high built powder boards that have one thing on their mind, which is just like surfy powder awesomeness.
Corey Smith is this guy who was really just pushing the limits of snowboarding in his garage. He's an art student who was like, I'm gonna go and make snowboard shapes that are indicative to powder riding. He and his buddies were doing all kinds of backcountry powder trips. They'd hike up into the backcountry and then they would ride the boards that he's crafted in his garage. And they are all experimental shapes that are really designed to push the limits of what we understand as snowboarding in the backcountry in the powder conditions. You can imagine there's so many snowboards out there that are just a regular popsicle stick shape, and Corey Smith is instead, pushing those popsicle stick shapes more into tapered, surf-inspired designs. They're the board that you're buying specifically for that deep day. When we get, 20, 30, 50 centimeters of snow, that's when you want to take one of these suckers out because they're really going to accelerate in the deeper stuff.
In terms of manufacturing, these are all made from the same materials, have the same profile. The shapes are obviously extremely different, but there's a lot of things that they all have in common.
They all utilize Capita's Surf Light core. I believe it's their Surf Light Core 2.0. When you have that lightweight core, it's really easy to maneuver in the deeper snow, and it makes powder riding more enjoyable overall. You can see that the core profiling of this snowboard is still fairly thick.
And then they have their carbon quad pack, carbon inserts under the feet.
The quad carbon forged impacts, bro.
Of course.
The forged carbon quad packs are these carbon inserts underneath the holes.
Underneath the holes. They're under the holes.
Is underneath your binding inserts here, and it's designed to do two things. It reinforces the snowboard where you need it to be reinforced, giving that board more torsional power when you're landing a jump. And then it also redistributes your weight and that downwards pressure into your contact points, giving you better overall control and steerability.
And then I think one of the other things that's worth mentioning too is their special powder base that they have on there. They have this specially designed base to work exclusively for gliding in powder in deep snow.
It's a sintered base that's specifically designed for wider powder chassis. So it's a wider category board overall. These sintered bases are designed specifically to accommodate for those wider volumes. Yeah, it's got that nice wood veneer top sheet. Wood grain is super popular.
Yeah, and with the colors too, you can see they really pop. They do use a silkscreen method to get on for the top sheet and the base as well. So you do get a lot of contrast between the lines and not much bleeding. So it gives you that really fresh look. And then in terms of the sidewalls, they're bonding the cord to the sidewalls just to make sure that it's all stuck together as one piece and kind of reinforcing itself. The interesting thing about these boards is not only do they look drastically different, but they have different length effective edges, they have different side cuts, different waist widths, different tapers.
It's not that one is better than the other, they're all just sort of different styles of powder riding. So this is the Powder Drifter, and it's the smaller of the series. Definitely more nimble, more agile, and really quick turning. You can imagine this is the board that's really good for that person who's looking for a board for maybe tight trees, moguls, or really quick, just agile feeling turns when you're in the POW.
Yeah, and as it has a smaller effective edge than these bigger boards over here, it's definitely going to be more suited towards that terrain that Andreas is talking about. Waist width is still pretty big, it's like 27.4 or so.
Yeah, it's a fairly wide waist, which means you can get a bigger boot size on it, and that's a really cool thing for the person who's got that, 11 plus boot size. And it's definitely a board that can be volume shifted, so you buy it a little bit shorter, maybe 5 to 7 centimeters shorter, because it's so wide.
The maximum suggested weight is 170 pounds. You think if you ride that being like 200, are you gonna potentially...
No, not necessarily. You can imagine that these weight ranges all have to do with like the best scenario, right? But even someone like myself could ride this 154 even though I'm 195 pounds. It would just feel more agile, more nimble, and a little bit more surfy. So it would be on the shorter side for me, but it's not that I wouldn't enjoy it.
And then moving on up, we have the 158, which is the powder glider.
The contact points have been brought a little bit farther down into the nose of this guy. And when you have a little bit of a farther back contact point in the shovel, it means that the board is always going to want to taper out of the snow from that point. It's always going to make sure that the front end is lifting, and then in the meantime, you've got this little mini swallowtail in the back here, and that's always going to encourage the board to sink.
And then one thing I want to point out too is like you sit them side by side. This board is 4 centimeters shorter, but it has a longer effective edge
Than the glider,
than the glider, and it's also, well, it's wider too, but the fact that the edge is wider just goes to show how much of this board is in front of the contact points. One thing I would be kind of concerned about is having such a big nose sticking out the front. You're going to start feeling some vibrations if you're hitting some chatter to and from the chairlifts after doing your powder day.
Yeah, you might get more rebound out of the front shovel in mashed potato-y type conditions. I actually really like this front shovel shape. It's similar to what you would see in like a Burton dump truck, for example. So when you look at this guy, it's actually a little bit narrower than the last board in the series, but there's more taper to it. So the front shovel is actually a lot wider than the tail, and that makes for a board that's always gonna plane out of the snow. It always wants to float. Plus, when you're like ripping around on this thing, that ultra tapered shape makes it really incredibly turny, and you're gonna get a little bit of kick up with the snow there, And then with all of these guys, they're a pretty tight turning radius. This one here is a 6.9 turning radius. So
6.8 on the last one.
yeah, so still pretty tight, pretty nimble, pretty quick arcing.
We're starting to move up to one of our big boys. I think these two definitely set themselves apart from the other guys in terms of effective edge, taper, length, just general surface area. I mean, you can see the fact that how much higher up the contact points here, that it's going to ride like a totally different board than the last one, because it's about 20% bigger in terms of the edge.
And there's way more of an effective edge on this guy as well. So you could argue that when you're on piste, this thing will hold up a little bit better than the previous snowboards.
When you're ripping fast.
Yeah.
Speedier guy.
You get a little bit more stability. Huge front end to this thing, really wide in the front shovel, a little bit narrower in the tail, and sort of comes out to that mini notched out swallow there. Guys, this is definitely one of my favorite shapes in the lineup. I think that it's one of the most indicative shapes to the kind of riding that I would do in the deep trees, but still looking for a board that handles when you're on piste or for carving in general. I like the squared off shovel as well. It just really makes for a snowboard that's always going to plane out of the snow. You get a lot of rebound out of that front shovel as well. It feels really lively. It's great in the deeper snow. Really fun for turning.
You might be giving yourself credit for. If you have something that's going on in your life right now that's challenging.
Yeah, this is definitely the most striking shapes, I think, of them all. Just the swallowtail is like a hawk tail in terms of it's ginormous.
It's a pretty deep, pretty long, pretty ridiculous swallowtail on this guy. So you got a ton of sink in your tail and a ridiculous amount of float in the front shovel. The front shovel on this guy is literally 34 centimeters across, so it's super wide.
The waist width is like 29.
Yeah, the waist width is 29.2, I think.
It's crazy.
Which is one of the widest boards ever. Even the Stump Ape is only 28 underfoot.
Shaquille O'Neal, we found your board.
This thing is huge. It's gonna fit any boot size. So if you're that guy who has a size 15 snowboard boot, you're gonna be able to fit on this board no problem still.
And yeah, it's got the longest effective edge, it's got the most taper, it's the widest.
Yeah, I mean, this is for the deepest of deep days. This is for Japow. This is for those days where you get 50 plus centimeters of snow. It's also going to handle steeps pretty well, and it's still going to be a great all-rounder for, you know, tight maneuvering when you're in a tighter area. You're almost getting into a reverse side cut in the shovel of the board, and those reverse side cuts end up feeling incredibly surfy and maneuverable in the deeper snow. So you're really getting a surf-inspired shape in this snowboard. It's the most directional, it's the most tapered, it's one of the hugest front shovels I've ever seen in a snowboard, and definitely a really cool window piece to have here at the store. On those days where we get like 50 plus centimeters of snow, this thing is really going to be a treat. Whole surf-inspired shape, everything coming together to really make it feel like you're riding waves in the snow.
I might be down to think that this is the largest swallowtail, although the Surfer and the Cannon definitely give it a run for its money.
Yeah, the Surfer and the Cannon are similar swallowtail shapes, but they're not as shaped as this guy here, especially in the front shovel.
They're looking at being like the pinnacle of lightweight boards and powder design snowboards.
Yeah, performance and powder, that's what these things are designed for. You're taking all of the crazy custom prototype experimental shapes from Corey Smith's garage, and now you're refining them with the high-end quality build of Capita's mothership factory. So you're getting a really high-end build on these snowboards that have otherwise been conceptualized specifically for powder by a guy in his garage.
Yeah, it's kind of cool because it's taking designs that normally none of us would see and then bringing them to the masses.
And I think that's one of the most fun parts about snowboarding, is trying out, you know, crazy, new, ridiculous shapes, really pushing the sport and seeing what's capable or what's doable out there on the hill.
Andreas, which one of these would you get?
Wow, they're all very tempting, and they're all...
Pick now!
They're all interesting shapes, but I think that I would personally go for the Tree Hunter. It's the most indicative to my riding style. I really like that squared off front shovel for deflection in the deeper snow, but having a narrower tail and still a fairly long effective running edge length is what's going to give you that versatility for an all-rounder board that handles really well in the trees.
Call me a sucker, but I'd have to go for the Nighthawk. It's just too beautiful and big, and just like me. And it's just gonna be the ultimate layback powder, deep powder riding. No matter how heavy the snow is, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, we do sometimes get heavy snow, and I think you would never be sinking your nose in this. You'd basically just be waving at your friends and their powder boards as you were just cruising along the flats. Cool, well thanks to Andreas here. And thanks to COMOR for letting us come down and check out the Spring Break boards. They're definitely, in my opinion, the coolest looking series out there in terms of their design, in terms of their shape, and in terms of like their graphics and everything. They're just awesome top to bottom. If the only thing being a downside is maybe a little bit too specified, unless you're buying it as like your second or third or fourth snowboard.
Yeah, you're probably buying one of these boards as your powder specific snowboard. You know, hopefully you've got a regular all mountain board.
This would be powder specific for like 30 plus, like over a foot. I think if you took this out in 5 or 10 centimeters,
it would probably not be that great.
It wouldn't be as great as some of these other ones, I don't think. But yeah, it just looks so good.